So we'll get started without further ado. Since Montreal is hosting the meeting, we asked of the UPHN, we asked Richard Massé to identify a first multisectoral partnership to examine, and very spontaneously identified Montréal métropole en santé, Montreal a healthy metropolis. Mrs. Drouin accepted to be the guinea pig, the object of our study, the guinea pig for our experiment with her team. So I'm very happy to turn the microphone over to her, and she is with Ghalia, Chahine, and Laurent Pouet. Montréal Métropole en Santé has two main components: the Montreal food system that deals with nutrition, and Montreal Physically Active, and I think you know what it's used for. So Laurent is responsible for the physical activity aspect and Ghalia of the nutrition aspect. So they have the floor. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for the invitation. It's a privilege to talk about Montréal Métropole en Santé. It's not just a public health creation, it's a partnership of, there are more than 200 partners, but at the core, we have a partnership with the city, the Department of Agriculture, Québec en Forme, and the Public Health Directorate, who came together to help this multisectoral mobilization evolve. I'm the spokesperson, but Jean-François could have given the presentation instead of me. I'm very glad to be here, and this morning's presentations, the MUSE project answers questions that we've already asked. When we did our strategic planning, and our little baby is going to be 8 years old, but it has evolved in the last 8 years. When we did our last strategic planning, clearly one of the needs we identified was to improve our ability to evaluate. What are our results? What is the point of integrating within subgroups the use of data? And we don't know how to do it. We're trying to see how we're going to mature during this 9th and 10th years, this mobilization, so that it will be even closer to our objectives. So let me start with a short video.
Did you know that in Montreal, 1 out of 2 adults is overweight? About 6 out of 10 Montrealers are sedentary and not very active. Over 60% of the population eats less than the recommended 5 portions of fruits and vegetables per day. A healthy diet and an active lifestyle are both essential for a healthy life. Montréal Métropole en Santé was developed with the goal of creating neighborhoods that foster healthy choices, physically active lifestyles, and better access to a variety of fresh and healthy foods. Thanks to Montréal Physiquement Active, Système Alimentaire Montréalais, and its many partners, we can already see tangible results and deep-rooted changes happening all around Montreal, such as solidarity markets near metro stations, hundreds of students taught to ride bicycles safely, a network of active green alleys, new spaces to grow food in the city and do urban agriculture. By working together, we hope that by 2025, Montréal Métropole en Santé will be known as the network that makes Montreal an innovative and sustainable city that cares for the well-being of its citizens.
So this explains the reason for being, and I won't come back on the data per se, of Montréal Métropole en Santé. It's a collective movement of partners who work on 2 aspects, healthy living, active lifestyles, and healthy nutrition, not in an individual focus, but to change communities, neighborhoods. So both daycare centers, schools, the health community, in terms of favorable environment to healthy choices. So this is the premise underscoring our project. So a bit of history of where this mobilization comes from. It started with a launch in 2006 of the Government Action Plan to Invest in the Future of the Quebec government, where there was some funding associated to that. It was co-funding by the Lucien André Chagnon Fund and the government of Quebec, $400 million over 10 years. These funds, it was decided at the time that that all the funding would be managed by Québec en Forme, which is a nonprofit, so not associated to the public health system. So here again, that's the origin of this mobilization. The financing is used at 3 levels. There were more than 40 national projects that were funded, some local partner groupings. That was the first phase. In Montreal, we had 25 local groups of partners associated to the neighborhood tables that were there to think about how to allow young people and children to move, to be more active, and how to improve the nutrition of youngsters. And around 2009, we came up with the idea of creating multisectoral regional tables in each region on healthy lifestyles. So, the brief history. I wasn't there at the time, so the history of Montréal Métropole en Santé is divided in 3 parts. First, from 2009 to 12, where we called it the Government Action Plan Table. That was linked, oops, there's a glitch here, to the Regional Administrative Conference. So this group had the representatives of the Department of Education, Transportation, Municipal Affairs, and Health. These departments sat around a table with the Agriculture Department, and we linked all these representatives from the regional governments together to think about what we could do together, because the Government Action Plan called on all of these sectors of society. So we had a very public approach. We planned to develop data, and 9 projects were identified of breastfeeding, active transportation projects. These projects were realized and given to organizations very quickly. At the end of these projects, they were evaluated, and it was as if the people around the table didn't really have the impression, didn't see why they should stay together. The people of transportation, when we were talking about nutrition, they said, well, what's the use of my being here? And slowly but surely, we came up with the observation that maybe that was not the right place, and mobilization didn't take hold. So in 2013, we abolished this table. In parallel to that, came up in the field 2 broad mobilizations called Montréal Physiquement Active and le Système Alimentaire Montréal, Montreal Nutrition System. I won't say more because I don't want to steal Ghalia's thunder, or Ghalia's the former coordinator, and Laurent. So Montreal Physically Active, these are 2 mobilizations that were more bottom-up, a partnership of people working on the different themes who came together to think about shared priorities and issues they wanted to work on. They each had their own specific history, and we thought, well, as a regional group, because we had the opportunity of continuing to receive funding, why not anchor that intersectoral regional table from existing mobilizations and see it as a lever of action for this mobilization to allow them to continue the actions linked to the priorities they identified. So we had 1.9 million over 2 years, and from that was born the 2014-2017 action plan that was there to support the 2 existing mobilizations that were, as I said, very bottom up, with priorities that had been set by the partners in the field. And later I'll talk about the new version of Montréal Métropole en Santé 2017-2020. It will be launched November 20th, and it was clear that we wanted to change the governance and funding model and also go over the angle that there were some priorities that we wanted to work on in the next 3 years. So, Montréal Métropole en Santé wouldn't exist if we didn't have the 2 original mobilizations. That is where the action happens in the field. The way we see ourselves, we are there to give levers. We accompany, we support financially, we give financial support, and we help to give visibility to projects or structuring measures that come out of consultation between partners around different themes. And of course, what we would like is that by 2025, the people working on transportation or on nutrition or on food security, it would become an essential network to work together. So there are when we want to do consultations, when we have specific issues specific to Montreal and we want to find collective solutions, we wouldn't need to create another organization, but we would use these existing networks that already work on these themes. The mobilizations per se. So we have two mobilizations, and each mobilization developed priorities or orientations that evolved in 2017, so people moved them forward. I showed you the previous ones. In Montreal Physically Active, we have the Orientation 1 that looks at the physical design of the environment, including transportation. Orientation 2, making active transit easier. Orientation 3 turns around sports or practice of sports and recreation activities. And Orientation 4, which is more generic, promotion and communication of physically active lifestyles. So this group has evolved and now works with a family focus, so everything dealing with schoolwork, daycares, and the work on that aspect. Now, in terms of the Montreal food system, the objectives that were worked in 2017 try to deal with health, access to nutritious food. Another one deals with the food offering in public institutions, from daycares, schools, health center cafeterias, and so on. So how to improve the offering of food. The other one is dealings with urban and peri-urban agriculture, and the other one is with shrink in food or waste of food. So these are the work groups, and the partners sit around these priorities. Now, the mobilizations have a role to create a regional consultation and a network. So to identify shared issues people would like to work on. It's quite a challenge. Yes, we can identify priorities, but when comes the time to sit people around the table on a regional level, it's hard to identify the targets, to see what knot we want to untie collectively. For example, to stop food waste or improve urban agriculture in Montreal. So we want to leverage the expertise of our networks and partners. So it's the aspect of sharing knowledge, of sharing experience as well, of becoming an incubator of structuring initiatives through financial resources, but we don't have huge budgets. That needs to be said. As you'll see, we don't have millions to hand out. It's really the idea that we want to become levers for core resources. We want to use that as seed money to find other funders, and sometimes to test initiatives or innovations and see if they can be generalized elsewhere. And we've seen that in our first action plan, some initiatives, some market studies that we did. Let me give you the example of fresh foods in convenience stores. We realized that the project is ongoing, but it's a way of subsidizing studies or feasibility studies for some projects. And the last aspect, but not least, which is to develop positions and promote favorable public policies, favorable to healthy lifestyles, the role of lobbying, and we have huge challenges in playing this role, both in our ability to rally partners around a shared position when comes the time to go to a public consultation or to file a brief. And at the same time, in 2014-2016, Montréal métropole en santé was co-chaired by Public Health in the City of Montreal, and it's clear that it was impossible for us to sign our own briefs and to be involved in the consultation itself. So it's clear that our lobbying couldn't come from Montréal Métropole en Santé. So how do you orchestrate then that work? That is one of the challenges that we still have within the mobilizations. And you'll see the food system will become much more involved with more lobbying, and it'll be the challenge. I think Toronto has great experience in this regards, so it'll be the challenge of strengthening that role. So we have 50 or so partners on the nutrition side and 150 in terms of physical activity. Some are more involved than others. I thought it was important because in the food system, in the last version, we had the opportunity of having a social network analysis done by one of our students, and we saw the evolution of the spatial configuration of the roles in the food system. Some withdrew, others came back. Some reposition themselves in the front lines, so it might be interesting. It's very informational. So now Laurent will continue. So the history of Montréal Physiquement Active, there was a consultation organized by the City of Montreal a few years ago, and there was a summit of Montréal Physiquement Active where Jean-François, how many people attended? 300. So as you can see, I didn't read it beforehand. So there were 300 partners who came, and it resulted in a policy on sports and physical activity for the City of Montreal. In parallel to that, there was the adoption of priority of action that was based on what Toronto did, and City Montreal and the boroughs signed the Toronto Charter at the time. So the vision of Montréal Physiquement Active was that by 2025, throughout Montreal, Montreal would become a physically active, inclusive metropolis recognized for its environment and dynamism. The interventions, I won't go over them because Mylène mentioned them, but to make things easier, people of orientation 2 who dealt with active transit worked with people in orientation 1 who worked on the physical design because they felt there was a bigger link between them rather than open air recreational activities. And their governance has a coordinating committee made up of permanent and design members. It has since been modified. We have representatives from different communities, but there are 8 statutory members, 7 expert members. Expert may be exaggerated. What we want are people who represent communities to be able to explain their community rather than being content experts. Indeed, there are about 150 organizations that are more or less involved, but still about 80 partners meet in the different orientations on an ongoing basis every 6 to 8 weeks to think about projects together. So, different projects, I won't read them off. Mylène asked me to mention a few, though. So, des Loisirs, there was an initiative that was developed to change activities, and it was piloted by one of our partners in cooperation with many boroughs, and they therefore changed their way of offering activities to their citizens. There was Montréal Bouge, where there was the collective reflection to organize coherent sporting events 2 years in a row. And Service de Garde Physiquement Active, there were the 5 school boards of Montreal that cooperated to develop the skills of the daycare technicians, school daycares, to allow them to offer more opportunities to the students who are in the daycare centers to be more active. and also a process with early childhood with Petite Enfance Grande Forme, which was a framework of the department on ways of developing it locally or regionally. So we received support in this regard. Different events. So the Week of Mobility, notably, that comes back year after year, that we supported against this year and that will be independent in the future. So when we talked about idea incubators, there are things that we funded and that become sustainable automatically because the partners want to keep them alive and see how they can continue throughout the years. We've also had projects outillés des milieux, the audit for pedestrian streets that allow all the public authorities is interested to improve the quality of active transportation in their networks. We also added universal access component in the broad sense. So yes, universal access for people with disabilities eventually. Well, that's not what I should have said. But also from 0 to 100. So concerns for the young people and elderly in Montreal as well. Parcours Ruelle Active, so active alleyways, so some things were developed. This is in support for citizen initiatives to give back to the alleys the role they had decades ago of places where families and young people can live and play. And study on open air spaces in the city. So the possibility of urban camping, for example. I will not try to readjust the microphone. So thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to share what's going on in nutrition. We call it SAM. It has a long history in Montreal of lobbying, of developing expertise. So a committee was called Nourrir Montréal, Feeding Montreal, before the creation of the SAM, the SAM. SAM was born of a need of partners saying we have to think about nutrition not only for in one aspect but systemically. So the partners wanted to join to recruit new partners. So in 2011 it was created, and we created the network with a development plan, a shared vision that I'm going to talk about, 40 or so. At the time we had 22 in version 1. Now we have 40 or so partners. The City of Montreal played a huge role with buy-in to the plan, and our major partners adopted that vision, and all the partners came on board. The second version, first action plan from 14 to 16, 30 actions under Montréal métropole en santé, projects that wanted physical access to healthy nutrition, supply and demand in Montreal institutions, and urban and peri-urban agriculture. And the version we're in now currently is added an additional aspect to our project, the creation of a Montreal Food Policy Council in Montreal, for Montreal, that will be operational and allow us to move forward, because there were very few stakeholders knew that in the city doesn't have a public servant dealing with healthy nutrition. So it's up to us to coordinate everything. So in general, we have 6 action strategies that cover the system as a whole. The system is understood as from production, from agricultural land, all the way to composting, all the way to processing, distribution, consumption, and post-consumption. So we cover the whole chain by having an environment that is favorable and that is sustainable, and ensure fairness and apply processing, improve supply, distribution, and avoid waste. So these are the 6 strategies that we counted on, and these 6 strategies are interesting. I'll show you in the next slide. It is part of an agreement signed between Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, and we try to compare ourselves to other cities, to have a connection with everything that's going on elsewhere on this beautiful planet that is our own. So the global vision, it's all partners, both community, research, everyone, have agreed that these would be our 5 orientations. Act on supply, decrease the environmental footprint, physical access to clinics, and economic and social promotion of healthy eating. And what was lacking, and that's where they Sam played this role, the council will continue, as well as the department, as well as Montréal métropole en santé, so strengthen the regional network, so how to connect the partners with what is going on throughout the world. Our partners, this gives you an idea. We try to have sustainable partners, social, economic, or environmental partners who have to sit down together, and any project has to be validated by all the partners. So this gives you an idea. 2014, 2016, who was there? These are the main ones, the most active. There were also others. So, for the concrete results, 2014, 2016, those that we kept, there are 30. We need to know what's going on in terms of supply. Who supplies what, why, where, in terms of education, from early childhood to university, at the municipal level and in the healthcare community, and cooperate to a national conference. So think about school place nutrition with our partners. The month of May, the month of agriculture, so we need to have local fairs, so action on the ground as well as a macro intervention, and the redevelopment of agricultural land on the island of Montreal, so how to link urban agriculture to what's going on those lands. And this is one of the points of how we can influence and act on what people eat during the events. The interesting projects, so moments of sharing of expertise in line with the reflection on the council linked with Philadelphia, Toronto, Vancouver, so on. So the council took a lot of time, and this is what we're going to launch very soon. The inter-university research network in nutrition. That's where we look at what's going on in universities. We have a lot of universities and a lot of research centers in Montreal, so now we know who they are, and we try to create these links and to connect them amongst themselves, because they may know one another, but not always. So it's also our role. We use forums and pilot projects. We do tests to see what's doing in Montreal, evaluate it, we'll see what's relevant and what we can do. And local markets near metro stations in line with the transit authority as well as local groups, and anchor that especially in poorer neighborhoods. A lot of training and projects that try to change school cafeterias and also develop funding for school projects. Also, for our council, it's been moving in nutrition, especially around public consultations on urban agriculture. There was the development and the creation of Montréal métropole en santé around SAM, and we worked together, buy-in by the city, buy-in of the 2001 International Pact, because the structure of the future council is based on the Pact 2001. So the link's already there. Public consultations for the council, the creation of the council with a motion by the City of Montreal Executive Council. So once again, a lot of work behind that, and in 2014 we announced the start of that, or 2017 we'll announce, but we've been thinking about it since 2014. It just needs to be officialized. So the 4 roles of the council cover the roles of the SAM with an addition. The first one is the regional or local meshing, connect the partners at all levels, all specialties and sectors. The second one is at the level of acting as an advisory resource. When we're talking about nutrition, if there's a recommendation to make or a reflection on an issue, well, we need to bring people together, both from academia as well as from the field and institutions, to think about what needs to be done. The three is what was our issue before. In other words, we have this power of making recommendations and of promoting policies favorable to a sustainable nutrition system. And as Laurent said, we want to act as a strategic incubator, always with our vision. The makeup, I won't go into the detail. If you have questions, we can go there. But we have 16 members who will make up this council, 8 statutory members, the institutions that are our anchors, and 9 experts. We are still having discussions but who have been chosen with regional representation of civil society, but also specialties, university, youth, philanthropy, and so on. Conditions for success. In terms of the benefits, it would be interesting to get your feedback on that. So how could we evaluate it, and how can we make sure that we will have coherent actions, efficiency, synergy of actions, sharing of levers, and so on, and the impact, the change we do. We know we're motors of change. Our partners tell us, our analysis proved it, but we have to go further for the future versions. So I'll take a few minutes. I think we exceeded our time to give you words on governance and financing. Currently, we had funding that was 100% from Québec en Forme, and we felt very vulnerable because of that. Québec en Forme, if it's rescinded, will be in a bad place. So in the last year, we rallied 4 major partners: the City of Montreal, Public Health Directorate, the Department of Agriculture. Québec en Forme remains a partner, and we have additional partners that may eventually join us to reach a multi-partite agreement that would allow us to fund this mobilization to the tune of $900,000 a year over 3 years. So the management committee of the agreement, these are the main funding agencies with our financial mandatories, because we are not a registered charity. And as you could see, we have a small team, Charles, the director, and 2 coordinators, as well as the coordinating committees. And for each group, we have work groups with the spokespersons who are members of organizations interested in being spokespersons of a group or an orientation. So that's how we work. And very slowly in our strategic planning, we'll develop work groups that will work on governance, financing, communications, and visibility, and another one that will be of interest to you, everything dealing with evaluation. So that's been said. So in our strategic planning, we did SWOT analysis. We looked at the strengths and weaknesses, and I think you have the presentation in your kits, but I think it's mobilization. We've got a good capacity to realize the planning we did. So a capacity of developing our action plans. The consultation aspect is in place, and diversity of partnerships, partnership with the city, and presence of major institutions gives us credibility up to a point. The governance structure was very flexible and reactive, so it's not a structure where they're located in a big institution, and now we've got funding agencies that decreases our vulnerability. In some of our weaknesses, the representation of the politics or citizens, some institutional partners are not as present. we still have low visibility and notoriety, a low ability to evaluate our actions. And in terms of maturity, as I told you, this mobilizing is young. How will it evolve to use data to be better anchored in reduction of inequalities?
So we've set a number of strategic goals, membership, engagement, to look for certain partners who are not yet at the table with us. Networking we've talked about at the regional level. We had a lot of regional buy-in, but other things are going on out in the field, and it's not optimal. Other things that we've discussed, well, I'm going to leave you with that, but it's clear that as far as we're concerned, each mobilization, each working group is attempting to identify priority action and then submits projects. We have a large team of mobilization to try to identify what the priorities are that we want to work at together. We have the pre and post data to see what should be changed, and everybody comes along with their agenda, and the projects that we finance sometimes may not necessarily have the impact that was hoped for. So we're trying to see this year, in the next 2 years, let's say, how and what kind of accompaniment with Montreal in Health, with what tools we can grow our working groups, and what tools we're going to give them to help them to incorporate the dimensions of inequality and to measure what they're doing, and also the areas that they want to intervene in, and to see what kind of impact that intervention will have had in the end. It is mobilization that is young as yet, and I'm very proud to show you how we've evolved, nevertheless. But I think that the first stage is that people will have to learn to talk to each other, and that they try to identify together the issues and to try to speak the same language, in other words. And when we arrive with other ideas that are more linked to our prospects for impact, then it takes the basic conditions that have to be present. And we've reached a stage where in some of the working groups we're ready to trigger the second phase, and this project will certainly help us along the way. Standing applause is appropriate.
Alors, merci beaucoup, Mylène, Ghalia et Olivier.
Thank you. I'm going to take a few questions for clarification, but I'm going to ask our presenters to go around the table to answer the other questions, because I want to get you down to work right away. So a couple of clarifications are in order. This question or statement is not heard by the interpreter since the speaker is not using a microphone. Well, that's a comment, Patrick. I want a question for clarification. Unfortunately, the interpreters cannot hear. Oh, well, there are strategies that will require some partnerships can be mobilizing. We need to have all issues can't be result in buy-in by everybody. You know, what are we going to favor? Biking or the scooters or walking or what? Yeah, that is exactly the kind of comment that I would like to hear at the tables, and that will bring back afterwards to the plenary. But that's the very kind of comment that I was hoping to hear from you now. Microphone, please. Well, this mobilization is an issue that we live with on a daily basis. You probably more than I do. But the way in which issues are decided and projects are decided are their mobilization partners. Even the management committee We are there to find the levers, if you will, the financial levers, etc. But the coordination committees for each mobilization and the workshops, it's the partners around the table that will identify these issues, and the city will be represented, not in all cases, of course. I would say that is the choice linked to verifiable data, or are our choices going to define structural issues such as building roads? Anyway, we need the presence of a representative of the city to approve major construction. Our niche is not that particular niche of influencing road structures, except when it comes to advocating where we want to be there to advocate when the city submits its cycling path plans or plans of that nature. That's where we want to be involved. Clarification? Well, it's a question that's going to be discussed in the groups. But mobilization can't come from an organization that's going to crush all the others. We need to mobilize activities, but it doesn't. Living in the city won't replace what you are doing, or it won't replace by things like sustainable mobility. But what we're going to do, as in public health, it won't prevent us from stating whether we're in favor or against. There's a danger, and that is the mobilization will be very fragile. There are still conditions that are not there to make it stronger and to keep it alive, because there are other projects for Metropole in health to create a tobacco mobilization group. That wasn't even mentioned because we're not ready for that. We're cautious in the steps that we take. We don't want to advance any further without having the conditions, the preconditions that need to be there. There are ways to mobilize. Mobilization takes place, but it shouldn't crush, things shouldn't cancel each other out. I would invite you to go back in the hallway. We've set up 5 tables with 5 flip charts. We expect that there will be 2 tables that will be working in English, 2 tables in French, and another